Post correspondent Jeyson J. Smart. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Good. And, well, some of the NATO member states should be happy too. After the summit, it has come to an end, and it's the very time we sum it all up. So, first of all, what have we learned about the nowadays NATO?
So, the summit was quite interesting on many different routes, what had occurred. I think that there's a lot of things that we expected, that there was strong support, for instance, for Ukraine. Ukraine also did not get accepted, which was also what we expected. And I think there was a lot of disappointment, though, with some people that there was not more done to guarantee how Ukraine will join in the future, a clear timeline as to when that could occur. That being said, one of the other key features of this summit was the fact that a lot of the leadership, I think, was unsure about how to handle the current problems that are coming up, the problems with Russia specifically. I think that there was not a lot of certitude as to how NATO is going to strengthen itself. I mean, there's a lot of general things that were said, but not very clear plans as to what are the next steps to be able to defend Europe from the really clear and present danger that Russia does position.
Well, NATO has agreed to strengthen further its eastern flank, and it has apparently also agreed on a 4,000 pages top secret plan in case the worst happens, that is in case Russia attacks the alliance. So, in your opinion, has the security in Europe, in this part of Europe, grown significantly, or not that much? And is Belarus and the Kaliningrad Oblast still a problem for NATO?
Well, that's exactly what I mean, is that, I think that there is a significant risk still for Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe has been very clear about the threat that Putin poses to the world vis-a-vis Kaliningrad, vis-a-vis Belarus and other places. The fact is that Russia is a real threat, and we can't take our eyes off of that. And that's something that, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia have been very, very clear on. Other countries have, I think, especially Western Europe, has sort of ignored that for years because it seems very far off. And to be fair, it's very far off physically from where they are. So they also don't have the history, the experience of dealing with the Russians that people in Eastern Europe do. And so I think that is why, fortunately, I think that is now better appreciated. I think that Eastern Europe is being better listened to now than it was before by the other NATO partners. But that being said, I think that there was a lot of things. Yes, there was the document that came out, thousands of pages of what to do in the worst case scenario. Should Russia, do something drastic? That being said, I was surprised that there wasn't more said clearly. I was really hoping that there'd be more clear signs that are positioning more NATO-led troops in Eastern Europe, American troops especially in Eastern Europe. But I think that at this point, the White House is just frankly more interested in U.S. presidential elections next year and is unwilling to take any strong positions that might jeopardize those elections.
I see. Now, let's discuss Ukraine itself. Yesterday, President Zelensky was rather outraged with the lack of invitation to NATO for his country. Today, officially, he's really happy with the outcome of the summit. So, should Ukraine be rather disappointed or satisfied with NATO Vilnius summit?
Well, I would argue that Zelensky is, playing a role, and he is trying to do as much as he can to get his country into NATO. And I think part of that role is the salesmanship. You overreach and you hope that they'll meet you halfway. So I think in his own mind, he understood very well there would not be a clear invitation for Ukraine to join NATO. I think he was well enough aware of that. He's a smart guy and he's surrounded by smart guys. He knew what was coming. That being said, they have to put on, especially for the Ukrainian public, they have to put on this presentation that they are fighting to go the full measure. They're going to try to get absolutely everything they can. And it does put, the Western partners more in an awkward situation to explain why that's not going to happen. And so the Western partners are probably, yes, more likely to offer some sort of a trade-off that, yes, we cannot give you a full invitation to NATO right now, but we can give you this security package, or we can offer this other solution. And I think that's what he was going for. And that's why today he showed his true colors. He said, yes, it was a success. The NATO conference did go well for Ukraine. And I think that is true. I think that it's very obvious that the countries of NATO have very clearly over the past year and a half shown that they strongly support Ukraine and have done truly heroic, amazing things to support Ukraine. And so I think that Zelensky probably got the best he could have hoped for in this summit.
Right. So, Ukraine got some security guarantees, but not from NATO just from the G7 club. Isn't that sort of a fig leaf for the West that it hasn't come up with a clear time frame for Ukraine to join NATO?
Well, I think that the reality is that the G7 thing is something that not a lot of people use the term G7 to refer to it. But the fact is, there has been rumors for a long time that some of the major countries in the NATO alliance, or others, Japan in this case as well, might be interested in offering some sort of a separate guarantee of either weapons or support, or even guarantees for the security of Ukraine. And I think that's what we see playing out here, is that though NATO is not going to be able to come through and offer membership, is not going to be able to come through and do what a lot of people in Ukraine had hoped, there are these countries who are the major world countries who are willing to find different ways to offer Ukraine some sort of an alternative without NATO membership yet that allows for them to be secured from future Russian aggression.
Right. Talking about alternatives, some experts suggest that NATO is expecting the Putin regime to collapse soon, and they just didn't invite Ukraine in order to try to normalize future relations with Russia under new leadership. So could this be the reason for this lack of invitation? And if so, isn't that a huge mistake?
I don't think that was the reason they weren't invited. But I do think, that being said, I do think that there is a lot more concern now in Europe that Russia may collapse. I mean, listen, the former Prime Minister Truss of Britain said that just, I guess, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, that Britain really needs a real plan in case Russia implodes or Putin is overthrown. It's come up in other European countries as well. The fact is that Russia is highly destabilized at the moment, both economically, militarily, as well as politically. And so what could happen next in Russia is truly an unknown. I think that there is increasing suspicions that the war in Ukraine could wrap up in a very sudden way should Russia implode, whether it be due to hyperinflation economically or militarily, if there's another coup attempt, or politically if somebody decides to finally send Putin right to hell. Anything could happen.
Right. Now about Sweden's soon-to-be accession to NATO, isn't there a slightest possibility that after all, the Turkish parliament will not ratify the enlargement of the alliance if the relations between Ankara and Stockholm worsen any further?
Well, I think that's actually going to be very interesting to see what it is that Turkey is going to receive in exchange for its vote. I think it's quite clear it's going to be a number of things, not just what's been made public, but also weapons packages from the United States and other countries who wanted to see Sweden get in. I don't think that the parliament would go against Erdogan's word, given his very strong leadership of the country, we could say. I think that he will be able to get that through. And when he does get that through, it's going to be a momentous occasion. But it was a sign. Think how hard it was, though, for Sweden, a country that's obviously very well developed. It's got a great military, things set. How hard it was to get them into NATO. Imagine how much harder it's going to be for Ukraine in the future.
Right. Well, the summit was not all about Europe. Also, China has been described as a potential threat to the alliance. How would you comment on that?
Well, most certainly. And this just goes back to what I think a lot of the NATO officials have said for years, is, China has always been the persistent largest threat. Under that was always Russia. Now, I think Russia is at this present moment a larger threat than it is today. But long term, in 15 years, or even in 2 years, I don't think that Russia is going to have the ability to wage war as it is today. Russia is being destroyed by what it's doing now. China, on the other hand, is growing. And China is definitely seeking to take advantage of the fact that Russia has done so much to destabilize itself and to weaken itself that will, in the long term, all play into China's favor. So looking east, looking more towards China, looking at what's going on in East Asia is something that should definitely be a priority for the NATO countries and something that we see them doing now.
Right, but that's in a long-term perspective. But the question for today is, what sort of response should we expect from Russia and China to this summit?
Well, I think in the case of Russia, they've already said that they're going to take very harsh measures and react strongly. I don't know what that would mean because they've been promising that for a very long time. We see that they don't have the ability to do so. In the case of China, I think that they don't plan on taking any measures. The fact is, they're not seeking any conflict right now. They realize that ultimately NATO strengthening itself is directly against Russia, mostly at this moment. So it's not a present threat. Actually, it might be in their long-term interest to see Russia get defeated by NATO.
Yeah. And the last the very last question. Quickly, NATO countries have also agreed to spend 2% of the GDP on defense purposes. Do you think that all the member states are happy with this resolution?
No, most certainly they're not happy. That being said, it's been well overdue and something that needs to come. If they want to be taking security seriously, they have a contribution to make that to the collective security of Europe. It's not just for one country; it is the collective security. And so to not do so, to not pay your dues, is unjust and something that should face sanction. And that is not something that should be acceptable in an organization where all members are supposed to contribute the same amount.
Of course, it is a collective security. Kiev Post correspondent Jayson J. Smart was our guest tonight. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That's all for